Okay, so what I'll just do for the purpose of this talk is try and read what I said at the altar at the beginning of the ceremony. And there's not really much to say after you've said this, but it's quite indicative of the sort of direction of what we'll try to cover a little bit today with talking about Great Master Dōgen. So I ought to, before I do that, say welcome to the new people, because I think there's one or two of you who've never been here before. And I also heard that one or two of the new people were very keen on Dōgen and had read a bit about him or whatever. So wherever you are, nice to see you and welcome to Throstle. So what we said was that Dōgen was quoting the Buddha when the Buddha said, "An instant before, an instant after. Instant does not depend upon instant. A dharma before, a dharma after. Dharma does not oppose dharma." So there's something to sit with. And dharma, of course, here is meaning probably more likely things than actually the Buddha Dharma. When we use the word dharma, it usually means the teaching of the Buddha, but also it means, in the Sanskrit at least, and somebody like Reverend Master Bowen can probably tell us a bit more, but dharma generally means in that context just anything. So this would be a dharma, a glass, or a scroll, or any of these other things. So an instant before, an instant after. Instant does not depend on instant. A dharma before, a dharma after. Dharma does not oppose dharma. Dōgen says, just this is called samadhi, state like the sea. He then continues, we should painstakingly learn in practice and consider these words of the Buddha. Appearance is a concrete moment having arrived, for the moment is appearance. Just what is this appearance? It is beyond only perception of sound and form. In other words, it's beyond only what we think of as the perception of sound and form. So that was what we said at the beginning. Now, before we go further, the reason we had a video was because we've got this rather extraordinary scroll here, and it was handed on to us from someone who trained in Japan. I think they died, or it was from one of their teachers. So we don't know exactly who did it, and it certainly wouldn't be the sort of scroll I would imagine that Great Master Dōgen would do, because I don't know if any of you have seen, but on the internet there's actually a very, very beautiful, beautiful picture of his writing in Japanese, or maybe it's in Chinese, of the rules for meditation, which is what we recite every day. And when you see it, it kind of arrests you, because it's actually both the teaching of how to sit and the beauty of the characters so beautifully set out. It has the quality almost of sitting and harmony and meditation just to see that picture. So if any of you go and look, you'll be able to find a picture of it somewhere. But this is a different animal, as you can see. It's very rugged in a sense and very ripped. So what's happened with this is that the art form is trying to express the characters. So it's sort of not keeping the characters exactly as they would be if they were just telling you the words. But that top line does mean one, doesn't it, in a character form. So just to sort of take that in, almost with your body, just when you see that, it's sort of, it's very sort of there, isn't it, in a way? And this extraordinary, the ripping of the page, the paper, the side, again, it's beyond words, in a way, the impression that gives. But I thought it would be good to show, because it does give you that vital quality of now, and almost like rip, and then there's another now. You can play with that in your own sense. So that was something I thought you might enjoy experiencing. Although, as I have to say, I think Dōgen would probably, I don't know what he'd think of that. So anyway, that's fine. I'm going to have to read a bit, because talking about Dōgen is a bit of a difficult thing to do. And because Great Master Dōgen, as you probably some of you know, was the founder of our tradition essentially, and he was born in about 1200 in Japan. And as we heard in the offertory, he was a very, very dedicated practitioner. In fact, he ordained at the age of 13, having lost both his parents as a very young child. So he had a very, very intense quality and a very highly, shall we say, highly developed faculties, intellectually and otherwise. And he basically came back from China, having sat under a master on Tendo Nyojo. And he then started to teach and went around in various ways, finding where his place would be, and finally it ended up at this place called Eiheiji, which a number of you may have visited. So what I've put in my notes here is that when we first try to read Dōgen, it will often seem very difficult to understand. And what I thought I'd do with this little talk is just mention or point to some of the things that our founder, who's sitting behind us there, Reverend Master Ji-Yu Kennett, the picture, well, she's sitting with us now, but she's in the picture behind you, and she has written a book which some of you will have seen, which is a compilation, or she didn't write it, but we put together a book of some of her talks about chapters of Dōgen's teaching. And what she's talking about here in this chapter is the chapter on meditation or samadhi, which, as we said in that quote of Dōgen's, is the state like the sea. So she likens her commentary on this chapter to trying to play, as she calls it, 9-dimensional chess, with every word running from one level to the next, up and down, sideways. So what she's expressing is how Dōgen used language in a way to try to, as it were, go beyond itself in a way, to try to get to the heart of the expression. And of course our practice is very much about how do we sit and harmonise both the thinking mind, emotions, thoughts, perceptions of them that come through in our thinking mind, and the body, the literal experience of body. So our sitting is very much to sit as body, mind, or mind, body, body, mind, and to find where is the place of balance, where neither one is overriding too much the reality of the other, if you like. So what I wanted to emphasize for those who are new is that whilst Dōgen is very tempting to read and read and read, because it's sort of almost like you can't quite get it, but you get a sense of it and there's an intuitive feel, it's also a snare, because he's really, really pointing us back at this fundamental aspect of our existence, which is beyond any one experience. And so the practice is all of what it's about, even though, yes, he did write reams and reams that we have today. So in her chapter, in her commentary on Dōgen's chapter, she starts by sort of basically saying that swimming in this samadhi, i.e. the samadhi of the present moment as we spoke of here, there are times of experiencing and times of moving, but it is all taking place in the great sea. And Dōgen says, entering the state of experience does not always depend upon an abundance of knowledge or upon an abundance of words. And then I put in here the instant before and instant after. Instant does not depend upon instant. Dharma before, a Dharma after. Dharma does not oppose Dharma. Just this is called samadhi, state like the sea. Reverend Master Ji-Yu then, in this harmonization process, speaks of her own experience. So it's very, very much that we're bringing this sense of what we sit in right into the moment of this, the moment of our life now. And so the fact, she says, that I was up to certain things, that something in me kept saying, you shouldn't do that. And then she says, what was it in me that kept saying you shouldn't do that, other than a trickle of the great ocean of meditation? The tiny little drop of the great ocean samadhi that gets things going. There are many twists and turns that enlightenment uses to find itself within our lives. Beautiful phrase of hers. There are many twists and turns that enlightenment uses to find itself within our lives. These are the trickles, she says, the trickles of the great ocean. Any time there is a trickle and you see the possibility of you going deeper in your training, of taking meditation, the precepts more fully into yourself, go with it, she says. And this is an interesting one, at least for me, I find. She says, do not go around looking for a catalyst, as in the old stories of a people awakening to enlightenment with the sound of a stone hitting a bamboo or stubbing a toe. And in a way, part of what we do when we lose our balance, which is a very necessary part of training, mistakes are also the great ocean in a sense, is when we lose our balance and we get, as it were, fixated, what is it that brings us back to a more of a balanced position? And she would say, well, the movement of those tiny trickles, because essentially what we're saying is the identity of our life, what our life is the great ocean of samadhi. And it's not necessarily a sense of deep peace and sort of amazing expanse or anything like that. And that's why when I used that phrase at the beginning, it's quite striking, because when you conjure up your image of what you'd think of as samadhi, we often have the image that we see in the internet and everywhere else, samadhi means sort of being totally sort of in another world. But actually, to say that samadhi is one instant and it's gone, brings in another, it's not our idea of what we think it is, in other words. So she says, do not go around looking for a catalyst, as in the old stories of people awakening to enlightenment with the sound of a stone hitting bamboo or stubbing a toe. She continues in relating to the ocean of meditation that appearance and disappearance, arising and vanishing, are but dreams. They are but phenomena in time, she says. The great ocean just is, which is why it is a state of meditation, and why it does not get upset, she says, by all our twists and turns and twiddles. That's very Reverend Master Jiu. And why it cannot be bound by the sorts of moral codes that we put upon ourselves. We cannot conceive of a moral code so high that it can encompass the entire universe, and yet tolerate the twists and turns of every one of us. But that is just what the essence of the precepts, which is the essence of the great ocean of meditation, is. In other words, the essence of the precepts is beyond comprehension. It's such an open-hearted, wide-hearted thing. It encompasses everything. Later in the chapter it talks about the great sea and how the great sea never refuses any water coming into it. She continues that you need to understand how to go beyond the opposites of time and space to enter the ocean. Again, an instant before, an instant after. Instant does not depend upon instant. You only have a relative understanding of time before then. She says you cannot help but think of a past and a future. This is why to dwell in the eternal present and not to dwell in the past and not to worry about the future is one of the biggest and most important doors into Zen training. She goes on, we waste years thinking to ourselves, oh, how awful it was when this happened or that happened, or what my third grade teacher did, because of course she was teaching in America. This is to dwell in past time, or we worry about the future. If you can learn to live in the now and not worry about past and future, you have found one of the best gateways into Zen training and one of the most frequently used. So that's what she says. So, as some of you probably are very familiar with, but I'll say it anyway, in our recitation that we do every day of Dōgen's, or nearly every day I should say, of Dōgen's instructions for meditation, we recite, and this is a translation not by the one we use, but Bielefeld, Carl Bielefeld. He says, he translates it as stop the intellectual practice of investigating words and chasing after talk. Study the backward step of turning the light and shining it back. And then in that moment, cast aside all involvements and discontinue all affairs. In other words, I think what he's pointing to is that thoughts are what create the sense of past time. And maybe what I should say here is that Dōgen, Great Master Dōgen, was all about invigorating us to actually investigate for ourselves what our own experience is. So we can sit and clarify, well, what is past time now? And feel into or see into, is there a past time when there isn't a thought particularly happening? So it's very interesting to just allow ourselves those spaces in our lives where you can just ask questions that one wouldn't normally think of in the run-of-the-mill day. So as that text continues, it says, do not think of good or evil, do not deal with right and wrong, i.e. those thoughts. Halt the revolutions of the mind, intellect and consciousness. Stop the calculations of thoughts, ideas and perceptions. Do not intend to make a Buddha, much less be attached to sitting still. Eminent students of the Dharma, long accustomed to groping for the elephant, do not doubt the true dragon. So this is a particular translation. And of course, many of you may be familiar with this story of the elephant and the blind men, which is an ancient story where the men are all grasping at different parts of the elephant and saying what the elephant is in their experience. So one gets the trunk and thinks, oh, an elephant is long and thin, it's got this trunk. Another gets the leg or the tail or the rump. And each of them really thinks, well, that's what the elephant is. And of course, as we know, when we're sort of, as it were, to use it to mix metaphors, if we're in the great ocean, then we kind of sense what the elephant is in the round, as it were, the total elephant. Or maybe we don't. But either way, we're, just to use that little way of letting ourselves, as it were, flow into this. So, do not doubt the true dragon. Apply yourselves to the way that points directly at reality. Honour the person who is through with learning and free from action. So in Reverend Master Jiu's translation of Rules for Meditation, she uses the phrase, neither trying to think or trying not to think. And also the fact that when we can recognize that we are deliberately thinking, then that is when we can let go. Or words in that direction. There's another translation I came across, and it says, as most of them do, body and mind will drop away of themselves. If you concentrate your efforts single-mindedly, that in itself is wholeheartedly engaging the way. So, again, that's pointing us back at our experience. What are we here doing? You must know that the true Dharma appears of itself, so that from the start, dullness and distraction are struck aside. Apply yourselves to the way that points directly at reality. So it's a funny thing as humans that we kind of feel as if we're at odds or we're away from something that we need to find in our lives. And what Dōgen and these other teachers, as far as I can sense, are pointing to is we're already in the ocean, we are reality. But of course, we often don't quite feel or believe that, or we think, well, reality shouldn't be painful and difficult. Maybe there's a way out. Well, maybe there is, in a sort of, in one sense or another. But as you know, probably most of you, that Dōgen's phrase, about we've got to study birth and death, because sooner or later we won't be able to get out from under the situation that we're in. And so therein lies the big project, if you like, of understanding birth and death completely, as he says at the beginning of the Shoshogi. And then in doing so, he says, then birth and death both vanish. Now that's easy to come trippingly off the tongue, and to quote somebody, it's another lifetime to really sit into it. So the key here for us all is, as we've all heard a million times before, to just sit, be here and present, and allow even the experience of pushing thoughts away or resistance of the thoughts that come across whatever they don't like, in a way opening to all of that. Because it's very easy to read these old texts and think, oh, it's all about not thinking, and if I have any thoughts or too many thoughts, then it's bad news. But one of the key points with Dōgen's teaching and all of the great masters was, in a sense, the non-division of everything. So even thoughts, when we can have the right, as it were, being of sitting with them, are not going to obstruct. So that exploration is very much what we're doing. So we're not fundamentally pushing anything away. And we see ourselves pushing things away. And that is one moment, and it's an instant, and it's gone. But what we often do is then carry our identity through by saying, oh, I've just spent a meditation period resisting and getting annoyed and having all these thoughts. And so then we're back down replaying the old past, as you very well know, and I do too. We do that quite a lot, us little humans. So, as I say, we're investigating our actual experience. And just to give two examples of phrases that Dōgen has used that we're very familiar with here, one of them is, always we must be disturbed by the truth. And another interesting one that he's quoting is, to look back on our past training is to see no speck of dust. That's quite something, isn't it? What is, to look back, to even use our memory, presumably that's what he's meaning, to actually deliberately have memory there, and to be sitting as the ocean, in the ocean. What is there a speck of dust? These are not questions that have answers. these are the things that, as it were, live us, if you like. And indeed, appearance and disappearance, in a way, if we try to feel into that or sense what that is, can we actually grasp or know or hold something that's an appearance followed by something that's a disappearance? Just like with birth and death, we begin to sense that they're actually not two completely separate things. So Dōgen is really trying to be, in a sense, pointing us back at the total inclusiveness. So in some of his writings he even says that the non-sentient preaches the Dharma. Rocks and stones, walls and tiles are preaching the Dharma. Here's one thing that he also says: we should allow ourselves to consider and allow others to consider experience of sameness and experience of difference. Unless the truth of thorough exploration is actually manifest in the present, experience of the self is impossible and experience of the self is unsatisfactory. So he's calling our thorough exploration truth. Unless the truth of thorough exploration is actually manifest in the present, experience of the self is impossible and experience of the self is unsatisfactory. Experience of others is impossible and experience of others is unsatisfactory. Experience of a person is impossible and experience of I, me, is impossible. And in Dōgen-esque fashion he then says experience of a fist is impossible and experience of the I, the seeing I, is impossible. He goes on, when the sea is dry, its bottom is not seen. When human beings die, no trace of their mind is retained. Retaining no trace and total retention are both in the human mind. He quotes the sixth patriarch who says that without constancy is the Buddha nature. That without constancy is the Buddha nature. That which has constancy is the mind that divides all dharmas into good and bad. Interesting thought, isn't it? So what we make as constant is the mind that divides all dharmas into good and bad. Thus, when that without constancy itself preaches, practices and experiences that without constancy, all may be that without constancy. I'll say it again. Thus, when that without constancy itself preaches, practices and experiences that without constancy, all may be that without constancy. Now that seems to make us go into our heads and use a very sort of intellectual understanding. So the last thing I'll probably say, to save you any more words, is that somewhere in this piece of paper there's a bit that says about how Dōgen is often saying experience with your whole body. You know, not just think, understand, click, 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 but to actually body it. And so that's why we have the kind of practice that we have. We do a lot of working meditation, as you know. We're trying to be present and aware when we're practicing, and finding a way, a middle way through what it is to be what we as an individual appear to be, and harmonise with the total situation of the group, the people around us. And that's a process of falling off both sides. I think one of the key things in my experience getting older is realising the fact of fear, more clearly. We all have a sense of some sort of level of visceral fear around the question of our own life coming to an end, death. And so this is our chance, in a sense, to meet that appearing fear, to let it almost eat us up, if you like. And so in that sense, I'm sure, as Dōgen, I'm sure, would say, that we are the great ocean means that every resistance, fear, worry, pain that we experience is not something we need to, as it were, reject or deal with, rather than to just allow it, if you like, to kill us, if that's what it feels like it's going to do. Sometimes we feel that sort of resistance where we think, if I have to do that or be this or wherever, go, do whatever it is, there's a sort of rising sense. I'm sure we've all experienced that, or being around the death of a loved one, something like that. But the great, gift is to allow ourselves to be utterly afraid, if that's what it is, or whatever it is, and realizing that that moment of utter fear, that's a total experience of body, it actually is gone. There is a death to death, in other words. So I'll say no more. I think that's about it for time. And I'll just finish with the closing bit here, which I was going to say at the very end, which is to close. Dōgen here in Busho says, and this is a wonderful end to this, when we utilize life, we are not detained by life. When we utilize death, we are not hindered by death. They are just the place where the Buddha nature exists. To affirm the Buddha nature as the miscellaneous circumstances manifest before us is, and I don't know about this particular translation, but he says, to command the style of behaviour which is free of hindrances. So to affirm the Buddha nature as the miscellaneous circumstances manifest before us, here we are, is to confirm or to command the style of behaviour which is free of hindrances. This, of course, is the life of the great ocean of meditation, which encompasses all existence and all actions. So thank you very much, everybody.